So you want to learn a new language. And you thought, why not learn a Romance languages? They seem pretty cool. But which one? Which is the easiest Romance language out of all of them? Well, to tell you the truth, I don't know. That is because I don't speak all the Romance languages, but I can tell you which one is the easiest one among the 4 that I speak, which also happen to be the most popular Romance languages out there. If you're wondering who I am Stefani, and on this channel I do tips and tricks on language learning as I love learning languages, and I have studied 10 in my life. So this is a passion of mine and I love to talk about it. So this is what this channel is dedicated to. And if you're a returning viewer, welcome back. I love having you back here. Now on to the languages themselves, right? Which ones do I speak to begin with? So the 4 Romance languages that I speak are Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and French, and they are spoken by the majority of Romance language speakers out there. I know that Romanian is also gaining quite a lot of popularity in recent years, but I don't speak Romanian yet, and of course there are several smaller ones as well, such as Catalan, which is also gaining a lot of popularity, by the way. And then a lot of others which are sometimes classified as dialects, for example in Italy, but truly there's many who would argue that they should be called separate languages, or languages such as the 4th official language of Switzerland, Romansh. Whatever the case might be, there are plenty that I don't speak. But among the most popular ones which I speak, I can definitely tell you which one will be the easiest one. And this is a popular question to ask because people often want to know, okay, what is the easiest one? Can I get my toes wet? Even if you're not looking to, actually, let me start there. Maybe you are looking for just one to learn. And you're like, which will be the easiest, which will require the least amount of effort? There's nothing wrong with that. Or you could be like, I want to start learning Romance languages. Let's start with an easy one before I dive into the most complicated. So whatever your reasons might be for being interested in knowing what the easiest language is, I think that it's totally fine, it's totally understandable, whatever the reason might be. And at the end of the day, it is good to take into account that, you know, it's not always about going for the toughest language in the world. That's not always the goal. So I will be ranking those languages from the most difficult to the easiest. In my opinion, the most difficult Romance language that I speak is certainly French. I think French is the toughest, and there's just no question about it in my mind. Here is why. So French can be quite challenging because of its pronunciation. The pronunciation is really difficult. You see one word and you don't pronounce half of the letters in it. And then there's also quite a bit of those sounds that you might have to make that are very, very new to you. So to me, French pronunciation is difficult. My native language is Slavic language, so I find it much easier to pronounce those like rolling R's of Spanish, etc., and just like a bit of a harsher sounds. With French, there's so many nasal sounds, there's just so many combinations, and like the French R is pretty difficult, and just the whole kind of like mixing together of sounds I find quite difficult in French. And I think that that aspect, pronunciation, is a big difficulty that makes French a little bit difficult to learn. And also, I also mentioned, you know, you don't pronounce half of the letters, which also means that writing is a bit difficult because there's just so many silent letters. So get that out of the way. This is one of the reasons why I think that French can be difficult to write, to pronounce, to get an accent right, and also it can be difficult to understand because when you have a language that's like you speak it with a little bit of a closed mouth. And here's what I mean. When you speak Italian, you're like very like open mouth, loud vowels, and just very clear enunciation, just making sure you pronounce each and every single letter like very clearly. In French, it's all a little bit like mushed a little. And there's just not that openness. You speak it a little bit with a closed mouth. So I do think that that kind of close pronunciation is what makes French difficult. Then another aspect of difficulty of French, I think, is the grammar. French grammar is more complicated than the grammar of other Romance languages. Granted, all Romance languages have this aspect of having basically certain things in grammar that are just translatable, if you will, across different languages. So like 3 ways to conjugate a verb, or the subjunctive, the bane of all Romance language learners. But French also has some things which are a bit more difficult. So things like more tenses, or just weird ways to construct questions, if you will, and to ask questions, right? The sentence construction in French of like questions to begin with, for example, is very difficult. Negation is a bit weird, and you also have the partitive, just many aspects of grammar. So for that reason, I do think French is a bit of a trickier Romance language. Another aspect, I would say, is the influence from other languages. And I mean, not nowadays, I mean in the past, within the formation of French. So all the Latin languages are, all the Romance languages are based on Latin. It's like all of the Latin ones, because yes, they are Latin languages, and Romance languages are based on Vulgar Latin, which was spoken in the Roman Empire. It was basically the forefather, if you will, the mother language of those modern Romance languages. And the thing with Latin is that in French, it's not the only base. So you get, yes, it is a Romance language, first and foremost, predominantly, but you also get a lot of other inputs. So you get a lot of Gaulish inputs. The Gauls, Celtic tribe, really influenced the French that you hear even today. As far as I know, the whole like number system of French, which is really complicated. For example, in order to say 80, you would say 4 20s. In order to say 99, you would say 4 20s, 19, although 19 itself is an amalgamation of 10 and 9. So there's that. But at the end of the day, you count in 20s, and that's how the Gauls used to count. And that just left its mark on the language, among many other things, and just changed it and added to the Romance score another layer of difficulty. And then that also influenced French pronunciation, according to linguists. But that's not all, because you also get a lot of Germanic influence from the Germanic tribes that lived in the land of what is today France. So you get so many influences from Germanic languages, like words, and that also influences certain spelling and pronunciation rules, such as the silent versus the aspirated H in French. So there's just like this, on top of this Romance base, there's like a lot of other stuff piled on, which makes it a little bit of a more interesting Romance language. Number 3, the third most difficult one, I would say, or like the second most difficult actually, or third easiest, would be right after French, I think Portuguese. And here I can understand if people want to rank Italian. But here is why I think Portuguese is a bit tougher than Italian, and so sits in between Italian and French. So to me, Portuguese has that closed quality that French has, especially European Portuguese. So that's like kind of like speaking a little bit more of a closed off mouth, as opposed to, again, the enunciation of Italian, right? So the sounds, all those nasal sounds, are a little bit tricky. Granted, there is this difference between Brazilian and European Portuguese. And so that makes it a little bit different, I would say. Because when it comes to European Portuguese, it is even more closed than Brazilian Portuguese. So in both languages you get those nasal vowels, diphthongs, etc. But European is even a bit more difficult to understand. The first time I heard it, when I was speaking only Spanish, I could not understand. I kid you not. And on paper you understand, but when you hear it, you don't, if you're new to it. With time, of course, you learn. But it's really difficult the first time you hear European Portuguese. It's just this very like closed French quality to it when it comes to the way that it is pronounced, that I find it a little bit difficult. Brazilian, easier but yeah. Also, among all the languages I'm describing, I feel like Spanish, it has all these different regional varieties, right? French, it has all these different regional varieties. But when it comes to Portuguese, I feel like the 2 regional varieties are a tad more distinct than when it comes to the other Romance languages, because let's be fair, the dialects of Italian are not dialects, they're languages. So I'm not even gonna talk about the varieties of Italian or something like that. But Yeah, in Portuguese they're a bit more different. The pronunciation is ridiculously different between Brazilian and European Portuguese. Words are different, but that happens in Spanish, it happens in French, so whatever, like a little word here and there being different is no biggie. But also within Brazilian Portuguese, I think, so Brazilian, if it were Brazilian, I would rank it to be easier. But just because of the addition of European Portuguese, I am ranking it a bit harder. Because in Brazilian, you know, you don't have the second person, for example, you speak in você and everything. So it's a little bit easier. You have to learn less grammar, you have to learn like fewer things. So that really simplifies things. But if you talk about Portuguese as a whole, including European and Brazilian, etc., I would say, yeah, Portuguese can be a bit tricky. Good thing is now, unlike French, and this is true for Portuguese, for Italian and Spanish, you have this kind of phonetic language. You see what is written is kind of what you pronounce. Of course, you have to learn the rules on how to pronounce, but you don't have this sort of like craziness that you get with French. So yeah, the pronunciation, and as a result, the listening comprehension of Portuguese is a little bit tougher. Grammar is of course easier. You know, there's not that many articles, for example, or like ways to turn the noun plural. Most of the time it's simply like you put an S at the end of it, and it's a bit easy that way. But overall, I think, yeah, because of the phonetics of the language, it is a bit tricky. So as I mentioned, number 2 is going to be Italian. The reason it's Italian is because, yes, there are aspects of Italian that are a bit trickier, I will admit. For example, the articles I think are a bit trickier than the articles in Spanish or Portuguese. And then there's like the ways to form plural are more. So I feel like Italian and French are a little bit tougher in terms of forming plurals. There's just more variety there than in Spanish and in Portuguese. And so that, you could say, makes it a bit harder, but the pronunciation of Italian is just beautiful for a learner. Why? Because you are able to understand so well, because every single letter and syllable is just pronounced so clearly. So, you know, opposite to the kind of closed mouth pronunciation of French and European Portuguese, with Italian, you just get this kind of very clear enunciation of every single letter, of every single sound. And that makes it just very easy to understand. Italian grammar is a bit trickier than Spanish grammar, I would say, but not nearly as complex as French grammar. So Italian is definitely number 2 in my opinion for that reason. And number 1 is Spanish. Now, I'm not saying Spanish is the easiest language in the world, because it can be tricky, right? As I mentioned, all Romance languages have a subjunctive, for example. That isn't that easy. The sounds aren't that easy. But it really depends on your native language, I think, because the sounds of Spanish can be really easy for some people. For example, for me, it was very easy, simply because I'm Bulgarian, so like a lot of those harsh sounds are easy. And so the nasal sounds of Portuguese and French, of course, are going to be tougher for me. But sounds aside, I think it is easy to pick up on Spanish words because, again, they're pronounced clearly. Now, with Spanish, it's not always that clear, because with Spanish, people tend to speak very quickly and they kind of tend to mumble words a little bit sometimes. But at least it's, again, that open mouth pronunciation, just like Italian. It is phonetic, what you see is what you get, you know, it's easier to write, it's easier to speak. The regional varieties, I feel like, are no biggie. It's not as much of this, because I feel like with understanding European and Brazilian Portuguese, it can be tough because they're pronounced so differently. Understanding French, of course, difficult, but understanding Spanish, when we put the speed aside, can be easy, because the different regional varieties and stuff there are pronunciation differences, but they're not that tough. And different words, I mean, that's normal. That happens in English as well. Like having different words for different things in different countries, not that big of a deal. Overall, Spanish grammar is simpler than Italian grammar, than French grammar. I feel like if I have to categorize them grammar-wise, Portuguese and Spanish are easier than French and Italian. Pronunciation-wise, and also not just pronunciation-wise, but also like comprehension-wise, because pronunciation and comprehension, I feel like, are linked. I would say that it is a bit more difficult with Portuguese and French, and so Italian and Spanish are easier from that perspective. So yeah, I've used a lot of criteria to rank them, but basically I think it goes easiest is Spanish, then Italian, then Portuguese, then French, and it was very difficult to put number 2 and number 3 in terms of ease. I could be persuaded that Portuguese is easier than Italian. I could be persuaded. They're very close there to me. They're very close. What is clear to me is that Spanish is the easiest, French is the toughest, and in the middle, I could be persuaded either way. So let me know in the comments if you agree with me or if you disagree with me. Now, there's one other aspect that I feel like is very present with any language when we talk about difficulty. So, here, of course, your native language matters immensely, but you know, there are Romance languages. So your native language, whatever it might be, you are addressing the exact same group of languages. So it doesn't have that big of an influence in terms of like learning words or grammar. But your native language might influence how easy you find the sounds of different languages. So keep that in mind. And the bigger aspect, the easiest language to learn is the one towards which you have passion. So if you have passion for French, much more than you have for the other Romance languages, French is going to be the easiest for you just because that passion is going to help you learn. So that is a very big aspect of it. Keep that in mind when you're thinking, oh, what do I pick because it's the easiest? You might want to pick whatever you have the biggest passion for. If you're like, I just want to get started in that language group, learn a Romance language, I don't really have any passion that is outrageously big for either of those languages, then you can just pick whatever you think is easiest, or whatever you need for a job, or for any other reason. But passion really is going to make it easiest. And that being said, there's one place where you can learn all those 4 languages. And I really want to talk about it in this video, and it is Link. If you are new to my channel, then you don't know what Link is. Link is a wonderful way to learn a language. It is just this wonderful platform. You can access it on the web or on your phone, and it's just a place where you can learn all 4 languages that I just described. But in addition to that, you can also learn many others. There's dozens of languages. New ones are being added all the time. It was founded by legendary polyglot Steve Kaufman, who speaks over 20 languages, and he just really knows a thing or two about how to learn a language. And so that platform is based on comprehensible input and on listening and reading concepts that Steve really believes in. And when you sign up for Link, you can learn any of those Romance languages. You can learn all 4, you can add other languages, whatever you want to do there. There's thousands of hours of different types of content, be it books, podcasts, news articles, Netflix shows, YouTube videos, you name it. Whatever you want is there, and it's also available on the go. So wherever you're going and you're like, I don't really have much time to study on desktop, but I do have time when I'm in, for example, the metro or something, then Link is going to be your best friend because you can easily sync your progress across devices. And right now, Link are running a once-in-a-year Black Friday promo where you're going to get a 40% discount on the annual membership. So do not miss out this opportunity, and check out the link in my description so you can get this special, a very limited time Black Friday discount. Check it out. It's only available for a couple of days, and then it's gone. So do let me know what you think of Link, of course, once you check it out. I would love for you to give me any feedback. It's a platform that I love, so I love discussing it. With that being said, let me know if you have any questions, and let me know if you agree with my ranking, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you so much. Have a good one.